off the 2024 Saas-Fee season of evening lectures back here in the plenum of the Steinmata campus. This brings back memories. A lot of memories. Avital Ronell invited me here 24 years ago, so I salute my senior. And it's wonderful to have her opening our season this evening. I'm not going to announce her topic because I'm not sure what she's chosen for this evening. I'll let her announce it. Anyway, it's wonderful to have her. And wonderful that everyone can be here. I won't go on any further. I don't need to introduce Avital. And I just want to thank everyone for coming out. I thank the online participants, and let us begin.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I greet you, I welcome you and your partners and your friends. And I feel very privileged. I am very privileged to be here among you this evening. Is this a energy block? Yes. Thank you for the flowers, everyone. Let's see. Would you mind my bouquet? I appreciate our work and that we can work, none of which I take for granted. It is a matter, maybe, in Heideggerian, in that lexicon, of a favoring, a granting, the gift of a different kind of timeline. The gift of finitude. Okay. A gracious halt that exceeds laws, engages world-endangering disarray in a different way, and dispenses with predictive anticipation. I'm thankful to my teaching cohort, to Catherine Malabou, to Chris Finsk and Nemanja Mitrovic, to Katarina Markovic, and Tamara Milosevic. Wow, is there something about those names that create a poetry of coherency? Among the other essential workers that the pandemic has taught us to identify, it was very downgrading to become an inessential worker, but it worked for me in the end. Earlier in today's seminar, we discussed the political imperative, both in Hannah Arendt and Frau Klein, to bring joy to the table, even when you don't have it to bring, especially in dark times when the world is unworlding. Even as die Welt weltet, so the world unworld, or worlds, the world welts, blistering up in Germano-English homonymy. If we can say the world, Nancy says we can no longer say the world. He points out that Arendt at no point questions world, or mundus, or monde, as she presupposes it for her political theorization. We can no longer say Weltanschauung, or go with other presumptions of world-forming intention. Yet she makes us responsible, Hannah, for pivoting friendship on world binding. So what is weltbildend? Gespräch. So dialogue and discussion, conversation. Each time world giving. So if I could, and let us summon our great friends and masters and teachers and those who have been here and continue to resonate for us and speak to us. If I could summon Jean-Luc here, I would want to kind of provoke him with a question of making world without the prior assumption of world, though I really get his very important challenge and provocation here, that Hannah Arendt depends on something that has been shattered and no longer can be referred to seriously. So today is a holiday. It's a Swiss national holiday. Do you know what it's called? It's not Independence Day.
No, it's just called the 1st of August.
It's called the 1st of August. Because you never didn't have independence, right? Except for Wilhelm Tell and okay, Schiller's good. Schiller's Wilhelm Tell. So today's a holiday, and I want us to let that resonate because we're going to question what that is. I won't question the Swiss miss aspect of a Swiss holiday or a national holiday. So to celebrate, I'd like to consider a mashup of concerns and motives or motifs that discards the privilege of traditional sequencing, if you don't mind. This year, meaning a year starting in September, I guess, there'll be 4 weighty anniversaries. One involving Kafka, another Derrida's 20th anniversary of departure, also Thomas Mann's Zauberberg, and you told me that, where are you? About Karl Kraus having a very serious anniversary. So let us consider that it's a year of anniversaries, of holiday, and that we are planning, many of us, to roll out these names and saturate the thick atmosphere of anxiety with their achievement and the implications for our unworlding of their achievement. My first impulse was to deliver a paper exclusively on force. Well, I had 5,000 impulses, but Derrida's use of force compelled me rhetorically and philosophically, building from the force and signification essay all the way to the force of law, the mystical foundations of authority. And in that trajectory, we would be leaning on Benjamin, who uniquely slams us with levels of retribution, divine and legislative, that reveals the performative and interpretive foundational violence that occurs when a new order of legality is instituted. We'd hitch a ride on Kafka's judiciary reliance in the trial, the judgment, the penal colony, and before the law, in order to leverage the quasi-concept of force and counterforce, of what imposes itself violently, necessarily, and desists, which is not quite the same as resists or resistance. In Derrida, force, which can't be reduced to a concept, begins with his thinking of literature. When during an interview on Radio France Culture, he mobilizes the work of Roger Laporte to set up a swivel between fascination and intimidation. So the force that fascinates and holds you, bedevils you maybe, bewitches you, and intimidation, force. And this supersedes, he says in this interview, genre, or even gender, but genre, or categorical solidity, lacking for the most part referential authority. So what does it mean to invoke force? And where does it belong in the philosophical lineup? So what is the force of a text? As literary inducement and poetic overreach, force seizes on instabilities, upends classical rhetorical and material maneuvers, even while making appeals to philosophy, while roaming the borders of Wirkungsgeschichte, a history of effectivity. Am I speaking? What's the pace? Nietzsche says it's all about cadence, so he made me hysterical. Is this an okay pace? Derrida once told me you can't speak slowly enough, except that Chris then corrected that and said, you're speaking too slowly on your podcast. Speed it up, girl. Get with it, right? So it now makes me officially crazy. Yet, philosophy does not easily recognize the heuristic merit or conceptual agility of something like force, which by dint of ghostly shadowing practices appears to sideline philosophical argument and the very possibility of demonstration. Force lines up with a history of neglect. Leibniz critique Descartes for ignoring force, and Derrida himself starts out in Force and Signification by underscoring the lapse of attention paid to force. In the formidable essay, which takes on literary criticism as practiced by structuralism, Derrida places force as the other of language, yet sees philosophy as the twilight of forces. He is scouring for the living force of meaning. So a lot of shifting of important values is taking place. He's scouring, as I just said, for the living force of meaning, something left in the dust by the structuralists' superseding concerns with form in literary criticism. So form had the podium. For his own part, Derrida appears at times to forego his analyses of force when turning to variations on residues of mourning, the trace, the destinies of survie, survival, and other crypts borne by his oeuvre. So something seems to make him go elsewhere. And these diversions and detours or repeat negligence of something that philosophy has proven to be phobic or disinterested, phobic about or disinterested in, then kind of vaporizes in his work. But the question of force returns, one could say, with a vengeance. By the time the use of force graduates to Derrida's essay on law and violent intrusion in the work of Walter Benjamin, philosophy will have lost a good part of its authority, whether divinely borrowed or sanctioned by legislative acts, linked to the human order. Husserl commented on the lost vitality of philosophical reflection, which used to carry living meaning for our very existence, while Arendt and Alexandre Kojève zeroed in on the powering down of authority, seen by them as a calamity of irreversible proportions, ... because we're mashing up here. Force, however, is also linked to the distress of inertia, such as forced passivity and poses of surrender. No longer an invasive force, it reduces to a fascinated standstill, a calendrical halt, even the event of a nano disruption managed by Kafka and eventually Nietzsche too, allowing for the dispersal of micrological flaps and propensities. If we had time, I would want to show how Kafka and Nietzsche, in a certain rhetorical way, with his dangerous vielleicht, the maybe baby of Nietzsche, preferred the speck or something minuscule to bring the whole house down rather than the spectacular and all the noise of the great rumored and inerasable nihilism and so on, but they both went for very quiet, and Heidegger points this out about Nietzsche, that you could put that on the floor if it bugs you. Thank you, you're so good. That Nietzsche was the quietest of philosophers. And there's something very tiny about both Kafka's and Nietzsche's powerful upheavals. It's very quiet. And it really, I mean, it has a silencer on its armor. Okay, dot, 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 dot. Okay, sorry. Let me continue to build an argument in view of what was said so far. That's a joke. Okay. Dot, 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 dot. With its renewable travel paths to areas of thought and being, both remote and familiar, prone to destinaring or clinched to the still stand of extreme passivity. Philosophy establishes boundaries that would require the services of Kafka's land surveyor, who measures the expanse of a region of thought dependent on language, based precariously on shifting grounds and whose legitimate limits are barely ascertainable. I think the barely ascertainable is where Kafka does revolution very often. In my work on Loser Sons, moving between a Jewish religion of the father and the developmental instinct of Christianity to become the theology of the son, Kafka, who strangely bypassed the Oedipal rumble, and I'd love to explain how he did that eventually, was showcased as the good loser, figuring the surrender of being. Dot, 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 dot. He showed a weak parasital pulse and so monitored and contained the collapse of the name of the father. So how do you not fight the father? Well, Kafka found out how to maneuver this in the letter to father, where he's really producing a missive and a missile addressed to father, but that he gave to his mother, who tucked it away. So Franz is a Löwy, he says in this letter, not a Kafka. He demonstrates in the letter to father, Brief an den Vater, as he repurposes a father-son no-show showdown, having baby Franz wriggle out of a fateful wrangle. So he's not even going to accept le nom du père because it's not the name of the father, it's not his name, he's a Löwy. The letter writer sidelines Hermann Kafka through a meticulous hermeneutics that involves taking on by stealth maneuver his mother's name, thereby ceding the battle of names and any simple filiation. Picking up the name discarded by Julie, he blames Hermann for his downbringing in lieu of an upbringing, but also thrives on his less than nothing score. He's less than nothing. He bulks up on this. He bulks up on the empty crumbs apportioned to him. The various feats and defeats of Schriftsteller sein, so this is what Kafka said he lived, the being of a writer, writerly being, are bent on assuming powerlessness, leaning into vanquished nullity while crawling on the margins of writing and its relation to death. I don't know why I said that like a nursery rhyme, but we're all in it, right? To win it. In many of his works, Kafka rides with the pauses that metonymically drive our being toward death. Sometimes a character riddled by slander is dragged off the grid, as with the ending of the trial, like a dog to slaughter. Bang, bang, banga. How would you translate banga? Like anxious?
Yeah. Modality fact.
Yeah. Bang, bang, banga, banga. There are many deaths in Kafka and proxy survivals, inhabiting the difference urged by Benjamin and picked up by Derrida between Überleben and Fortleben, Survie, and its mockery of surplus existence that drags on for a spell. So what's the difference between, these aren't satisfactory translations, but we could jam on that at a later time or never, between survival and living on, or just dragging on. This is very important for Derrida and of course Benjamin, the surplus of existence. As with Nietzsche, read by Nancy, death precedes itself. And I think Nancy is talking about when you've seen that famous picture propped up by his Nazi sister, Elizabeth Förster Nietzsche. When Zizek gets mad at me, he says, "You're worse than Elizabeth Förster Nietzsche." So she propped him up, and you have that image of him with his overgrown excremental mustache, and he's in a stupor in Goethe's library, right, in Weimar. Don't get me started. So this is the death, according to Nancy, that precedes itself. It is precedent, meted out by vague signals of paused being. Things clock out in the Kafkan text without dropping dead on the spot, but by rehearsing a cadence, rounding a full stop that recovers a beat. Once, Levinas asked a gaggle of children he was instructing after services, if God is God, the Almighty God, why does he need a day of rest? The little ones had answers, but it didn't satisfy their teacher. Surely God isn't susceptible to fatigue. In the castle, Kay is about to receive the revelation of his predicament when, seized by a wave of exhaustion, he falls asleep. At times of promised delivery and deliverance, someone hits the snooze button. One of the threads that Franz Löwy, aka Kafka, continually pulls on involves time pulses, including how to inscribe death on the calendar or in the calendar, whether as announcement or sneak ontic preview, anniversary, national holiday, or Stoß in the Heideggerian sense of being fatefully prodded, pushed, even slammed. Heideggerian hits or whacks show up in Derrida's Geschlecht series, serving a dent of special becoming that also determines gender and genus. This is a very important set of shifts when Heidegger sees you as hit by a certain send-off that will become, at least provisionally, if not seriously, determining. Kafka's abbreviated or creaturely beings routinely succumb to such hits, prompting all sorts of destructions by setting off mortal indicators. What kind of encroachments or events of precedence does death send out, destinating at different breakout points? What kind of existential scheduling pencils in the intrusion of a dead zone, a crash and burn site to which his quasi-characters are committed by their families, bureaucratic gridlock, destructive love, unrelenting exploitation, and other tropes of normal existence to which his quasi-characters succumb. You know, when Deleuze writes on Kafka, he gets rid of the point, the punctuation, the period. So that almost makes K a fuller character than he might be in Kafka. For our abbreviated purposes, I would approach the slam of slander and juridical pursuit in the trial according to the quiet horror of having your hearing scheduled, in this case, when they put you on hold on a day of rest, when everything lays fallow in latency and withdrawal, namely in terms of the summons K receives, telling him to appear in court on a Sunday. A brilliantly invasive move on the part of Kafka, kind of destruction of time and foreboding laceration. For writers, the lull of Sunday breaks open all sorts of vaults. Some addict writers, such as De Quincey, Thomas De Quincey, keep focus on Saturday evening, when laborers can practice minor outbursts of drunken revelry and Dionysian meltdown, nailing the date with fate, the crack up of the opium eater. By the time it comes around, Sunday is a bust for De Quincey, a blank stretch of timed unconsciousness when one has to sleep it off or hang out in a stupor, wasted, nursing a hangover. Sunday barely happens, which makes it prone to pure event of exposure. The day that ends and opens the week for mortals offers, as with Before the Law, a glimmer of transcendence, a shooting light beam. Those of you who suffer migraines know about this little transcendence of a light beam, or the burn of gaslighting. Freud gives us another round of anxiety with his Sunday neurosis. If it weren't like handing you a mocktail, I would tie up these reflections by venturing that in many ways, the time of a hangover, the other Sabbath or Sunday lull, evokes a holiday in the sense disclosed by Heidegger, believe it or not, when reading Hölderlin on the motif of vacating time in the hymn, very famous hymn, on Feiertage. So this is translated this title of a very famous Hölderlin hymn, Wie wenn am Feiertage, as when on holiday. Sunday does not in itself constitute a holiday. You might even say it pumps up the laborers and letting them release, and it's part of an economy, a sinister economy even. But it's not a holiday, is it? But it delivers, nonetheless, a quiver, setting the existential lens for a glimpse into a decelerated relation to time that functions, according to Hölderlin, as when, as if on holiday. The poet Hölderlin approaches a sense and meaning of holiday that opens temporality in the mode of fiction, steered by presentiment, charting a reflective relation to the future, as when on holiday. Wie wenn am Feiertage makes us ask, when does that take place? The as when. Does it even take place? Or is this suspension of time within time clocked by the privilege of poetic language, as when Homer called down the gods on a poetic timer that lets them be in and through language? A pretend holiday closes off a temporal corridor, prompting a violence to the psychic capacity to think time, to relinquish calendrical meter in view of ontological instability, the common predicament of timed creatures and their trembling lot. Is this making any sense to anyone? Okay, I'll go on. I won't do on the scale of 1 to 10 as I do in class. Both Heidegger and Derrida turn their thought at crucial junctures to holiday and anniversary, when time rounds in on itself in order to mark a generalizable, if singular, return, snagged in aporia and the need to time out. The sacred component of holiday, it's a holy day, in Hölderlin tries to give us a day off scale, off duty, off the mark, to the extent that the holiday, the as when on holiday, grants reprieve, overriding this unconscious billing system for the squeeze and knowledge of destructive encroachment. For a moment of suspended self-interrogation, as when giving oneself a break, give me a break, we celebrate a temporal push forward. The Sundays and holidays only convocation prompts a kind of rhetorical entrapment, a quasi-juridical hoax. From what I can tell, the trial overturns the fateful retreats and reprieves sought by every kind of miserable writing being, beginning perhaps with Rousseau's retreat in this neighborhood, that so pained Schiller and puzzled Paul de Man. It does not take hermeneutic extreme sports to clear and fear the sabbatical that Sundays portend. So we'll get back to the spooky unworlding of Sundays. First, let me indicate this much. The spread of unworlding acts, passive halts, and allowances. By the way, so I'm trying to read a roster of what happens when things are halted. And if we had time, like in 5 years, to read Freud's important case study in obsessional neurosis, the rat man, everything starts when there's a military maneuver that halts. So what happens even when massive military encroachment stops? That's when all the neurotic symptoms start spilling their secrets. So what are passive halts and allowances that have seized on all living and inanimate beings inescapably with brutal resolve, involving the unleashing of rhetorical violence and even technological prowess, driven by new morphs of greed and power? And these are motifs in Kafka. He says he was the greediest, most miserly, and he competed with his sister for who was more of a greedy predator at the family table. But these, and he's very interested when the pause button is hit, how disinhibited strains of cruelty and indifference occurs in the world and historically. And we might do the same and think of our narcotically stuffed nations prompted by authoritarian instincts. I know I'm running ahead, but there's also the halt and suspension that drugs create. Don't forget that recently it was shown in the White House that the White House was a one big drug deal going down all the time with the other guy. And when things are scrambling for hyped up supremacies, I'm going to go ... The prophetic analyses of Freud's pessimism and Derrida's smackdowns of metaphysical strongholds should help us sort through some aspects of what afflicts us today in terms of political downturns. The question formulated by Philippe Lacoue-Labarthe that we've discussed in class, in the wonderful class, why do we turn to politics as a remedial frontier or adequate front for addressing our despair? Why do we still turn to politics that has failed us so spectacularly? Understanding the questionable choices of address and discursive structuring practices, the way we barely manage our being in common, I consider the wounding lash of things and language reflecting on the force of what can be said and implemented with destructive intent, what comes in fact from a primal store of aggression. I know I'm doing a flyby here or a drive-by on some of these motifs that we can discuss. In Freud's considerations of primal overreach and the will to extinction, he placed the Aggressionstrieb, the aggressive or aggression drive, ahead of the death drive. So it came first. Aggression comes first in Freud's thought of something other, and that also overrides the life instinct. So this replaced without effacing, the death drive replaced without effacing the latter, the Aggressionstrieb. In other words, the aggressive impulse formed the basis for shooting beyond the pleasure principle. Believe it or not, this all makes sense in terms of what Kafka is doing as well. Freud demoted aggression without suspending its significance in his subsequent formulations, but we still have access to its various articulations and subsidiary branches, including types of envy that continue to stoke aggressive impulses, including those that feed different yet persistent types of racism. Lacan points out that Lebensneid, so life envy, which he's kind of more interested in than so-called penis envy, is way up there in terms of the unconscious inscription of aggressive human poses. The propensity to envy another's life, including the imagined life robustness of the persecuted other. This envy night, handled adeptly by Melanie Klein as prime attack mode, goes so far as to outline racist overdrive, a pump of rage, getting back to Lacan, that posits the other's imaginary endowment, packaged and managed by the argot, culturally coded, and I'm well instructed, thank you, Sarah, of having the big dick energy be decoded as BDE, ascribed to the enviable if threatening other. The paradoxical status of the persecuted as enviable is still something to contend with, along with other internalizations, identifications, and fabrications of the false self born of fears. So besides the aforementioned unworlding, the destructions and genocidal rage visited upon Gaza, Africa, Haiti, Ukraine, the women and queers of the world, I also have come up against another development of Hölderlin's Viven am Feiertage, understanding that holiday in the poetic lexicon also opens the time of mourning, a laceration in the doling out of time and withdrawal of the pace of so-called daily life. It is hard to describe, for instance, and here I'm going to, of course, stop trying to, the vacuity of August in Paris, when everyone has gone on fetishized vacation. I have explored the implications of retired existence in Rousseau, Goethe, in the vacating force of some of Heidegger's work, as the prelude even to thinking in Was heißt denken? How are you supposed to hear the call of thinking if you're not idling, floated by rigorous leisure? And let me now draw to a conclusion. So there's a kind of inertia that I'm trying to follow, also in terms of Kafka and the arrest that befalls one, the accusation, the slander that befalls one. So when Blanchot launches the Entretien Fini, which can also be understood as infinite maintenance, the text showcases two weary interlocutors exhausted by metaphysics and a muted back history of quarrel. Philosophical thought no longer sirens in emergency supplies of meaning. That's what Nietzsche calls philosophy, bringing in emergency supplies of meaning where there is none, but finds itself fatigued, losing force, perhaps the precondition for gaining ground in the wearying nonsense of all sorts of philosophical turf wars, surrendering signs of a release and letting go according to nearly impossible rules of engagement. The motif of fatigue saturates the works of Levinas and appears at the tail end of Lyotard's reflections, offering a way out of the fight zone. So one of the sub-themes here is, how do you get out of a fight, as Kafka did, as a good loser? But fatigue gets you out of the fight zone and out of a losing streak of philosophical contest. This will open up other dossiers that we won't have time to consult right now, but just let's remember that Benjamin reminds us to measure the difference between a contest and a test, and what it is to enter a contest in terms of thinking and writing. The appearance of throwing in the towel, a surrender to heavyweight opposition, is also part of the technique of the great champ Muhammad Ali. His rope-a-dope technique, which consists of wearing down your opponent by letting them beat you up until they are too exhausted to land another punch. Only after holding a Tai Chi caliber of resistance, letting the opponent come apart by means of their own force of rage and intervention, then you rise up and deliver the precision hit. Muhammad Ali, who was arrested for opposing the war in Vietnam, taught us how to take a beating and when to land a punch. So let me offer a temporary transposition, if in the form of a mutilated telegraph message. Dot, 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 dot. I prefer not to complain about being misunderstood or misidentified, insulted by distorted paraphrase and impoverished projection. Despite the odds, there are those of us who are itching for a good fight, a responsible riposte. Others with a different nervous system, and here homage to Karl Kraus and Benjamin again, the rights of nerves, are worn out by the requirement in our work and workouts of athletic vitality, the force of philosophical assertion, Don't forget that the original Olympics included a contest of the rhetoricians. I hope on behalf of those still in training and out there showing their medal that the rhetorical event is soon restored. Thank you.